Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I will introduce status information about e-invoicing process in France. Here, we have two general definitions, the e-invoicing and e-reporting, two complementary processes in France. E-invoicing corresponds to the issuance, transmission, and receipt of invoices to the French tax administration in a mandated format. So this mandated format includes some base data in structured format, unstructured format, or mixed format. By structured format, we mean data structured according to the standards that is agreed between the parties. So this is usually an XML structure, and this is the structured format that should be used in e-invoicing process. In addition to this structured format, unstructured form, whose representation is very similar to paper invoices, and most of the time PDF invoices corresponds to this unstructured form. And also we have the mixed format, which corresponds to a combination of structured format and unstructured format. So an XML file together with an PDF file corresponds to the mixed format. During the transition phase in France, all of these formats are allowed, but after the transition phase, structured format will be used as the main format for transmission of e-invoices. In addition to e-invoicing, there is a complementary process which is called e-reporting, which covers the transmission of certain mandated data that are not covered by the e-invoicing process, because the e-invoicing process covers usually the business-to-business and the business-to-government transactions, but there are some transactions that are not within the scope. For instance, the business-to-business transactions for non-French customers, or the business-to-consumer transactions that are taxable transactions, of course, and also purchases from foreign operators, excluding the imports, and finally, the payment status of invoices for services. So for these transactions, e-reporting is the main transmission format that is required by the tax authorities. In this slide, you see the legal background in France for the e-invoicing and e-reporting process. The process started in January 2020 with the B2B, B2G e-invoicing process. So business to government transactions become mandatory starting from 1st of January 2020. And the platform, the Kronos Pro platform, is used for this purpose. And then in 2021, with the ordinance number 1190, the mandatory e-invoicing for domestic business-to-business transactions and mandatory e-reporting or transactions for cross-border business-to-business transactions and business-to-consumer transactions are defined with this ordinance. In 2022, with the Article 290 of the French General Tax Code, the transactions are described for non-domestic business-to-business international transactions, and the business-to-consumer transactions defined in a more detailed manner. And in the same year, with the Article 26, the new legal framework for e-invoicing is constructed, and the formats for exchanging data with the public invoicing portal is defined with this article. Finally, in the mandatory e-invoicing process will start with 1st of July 2024, and especially starting from this date, receipt of invoices in electronic format will be mandatory. In addition to that, sending e-invoices will be mandatory for large enterprises. We will come to this issue in the following slides for other company types. In this slide, you can see the main stakeholders that are involved in the e-invoicing process in France. These stakeholders are important because we will refer these definitions during the presentation. We have companies, we have the public invoicing portal, we have registered private platforms, PDPs, and also we have dematerializing operators, the ODs. The companies correspond to the company suppliers, buyers, or their legal representatives. And the public invoicing portal, PPF, is the third-party public offering for e-invoicing and e-reporting process. So this is the main portal that will be used for e-invoicing and e-reporting. In addition to public format, in France, different from most of the countries, there are also registered private platforms, which are called PDPs. These platforms provide services, dematerialization services, especially for invoices registered by the tax authority. They can send invoices to their recipients, and they can transmit data to the PPF, the public invoicing portal. And finally, we have dematerializing operators, the ODs. These operators are similar to registered private platforms, but they provide the same dematerialization services, but they cannot send e-invoices directly to their recipients. In order to send invoices, they should be connected either to the PPF, the public invoicing portal, or the registered private platforms, PDPs. So what is the aim of the reform, e-invoicing reform in France, in terms of these shareholders? First of all, from the company's perspective, both buyers and the suppliers, there will be reduction in invoice processing costs because all of the process will be automated from end to end. Paperwork will be reduced, so there will be reduction in processing costs. Also, there will be reduction in administrative burden of tax management process because tax management issues will be submitted to the government by means of e-invoicing and e-reporting processes. The payment deadlines will be tracked better, and automation and rationalization will be achieved. The customers, the companies, the buyers, and the suppliers will have better access to their processes and their monitors. And also, as a result of all of these processes, the business relations will be improved. From the perspective of dematerializing operators, first of all, as dematerializing operators are allowed in France, it will result in growth of French market for electronic invoicing. And as a result of this, repositioning of new service offers, especially high added value segments, will be improved. So these will be the benefits from this perspective. Finally, from the state perspective, first of all, the VAT declaration will be much more efficient. VAT fraud rates will be decreased because all of the processes will be monitored closely, and also the government will have a better knowledge about the company activities. So the new reform provides advantages for all of the parties involved in the process. In this slide, you see the deadlines for the business-to-business e-invoicing mandate in France. As I said in the previous slide, starting from 1st of July 2024, all companies, regardless of size, must accept receive e-invoices according to new rules. So starting with this date, all of the companies, whatever the size is, must accept the e-invoices as long as their supplier sends e-invoices. In addition to that, starting from this date, business-to-business e-invoicing and e-reporting will be mandatory for large companies. What do we mean by large companies? If number of employees is greater than 5,000 employees, and also the revenue is greater than 1.5 billion euros, or annual balance sheet total is greater than 2 billion euros, then the company is considered as a large company. And for starting from this date, these large companies should pass the e-invoicing process. After 6 months, starting from 1st of January 2025, B2P invoicing and e-reporting will be mandatory for ETI and medium-sized companies. The ETIs and medium-sized companies corresponds to the companies that have employees smaller than 5,000 and greater than 250 employees, and their revenues between 50 million euros and 1.5 billion euro, or their annual balance sheet total is smaller than 2 billion euros. So these companies should switch to e-invoicing starting from 1st of January 2025. Finally, the other companies, the small companies and micro enterprises, the SMEs and the micro enterprises, should pass to e-invoicing process starting from 1st of January 2026. These companies corresponds to the SMEs if they have less than 250 employees, and if their revenue is less than 50 million revenue, or their annual balance sheet total is smaller than 43 million euros, then they are considered as SMEs. On the other hand, the micro enterprises corresponds to the companies that have less than 10 employees and smaller than 2 million euros revenue and annual balance sheet total. So these are the critical dates in terms of e-invoicing. Now, let's move on to the functional side of the process. In France, a scheme, Y scheme, is used in the e-invoicing and e-reporting process. What does it mean? The Y scheme is used to exchange invoices. The companies have two options in France. The first one is the companies can go through a registered private platform from the government platform. They can use the government platform, or they can use registered private platforms. So they have two options. What is the aim of this system? First of all, the aim of the system is a seamless integration with all of the parties involved in the invoicing process. So some of the companies may already work with some private operators in their current system. So this will reduce their adaptation costs, so they will continue with their registered private platforms. On the other hand, for the companies that do not have such invoicing solution, they can use public invoicing portal, and this will reduce their entry costs. So this Y scheme is advantageous in terms of these two cases. Here we give some more detailed information about the PPF, PDP, and ODs. What was the public invoicing portal? It was the public portal used for e-invoicing process. It will be free of charge. So all of the invoice issuers, recipients, private and public organizations will be able to use the platform free of charge. They can submit, receive, track e-invoices, and they can also submit e-reporting over the public platform. Additionally, the public platform has three alternative modes, which we will discuss in the following slides: portal mode, service mode, and EDI mode. So these three main alternative exchange modes can be used in the public invoicing portal. Additionally, submission of invoices in synthetic formats and receipt of invoicing data will be enabled by the PPF. The second option, the registered private platforms, PDPs, they have similar services like public invoicing portal. They will enable forward e-invoices to their recipients platform in a structured format, in a similar format. They will be able to receive invoices and make them available to their recipients. They will receive and forward mandatory invoice and e-reporting data to the tax authority, because if registered private platforms are used, then the information should be submitted to the tax authorities, so they will have this capability also. They will perform some compliance controls, which will be discussed in the following slides. So this compliance controls should be made also. These PDPs should also support processing status of e-invoices. So the processing status of e-invoices should be tracked over these registered private platforms. Finally, they will provide the public invoicing portal with the information needed to update the directory. A central directory will be used. This directory stores the information about the recipients. Finally, we have dematerializing operators, the ODs. They offer dematerialization services. They extract invoice data, they produce the invoices in the structured format. However, they cannot send e-invoices directly to their recipients, but they must be connected either to the PPF or PDP. So they cannot send invoices directly, but they give dematerialization services to their recipients, to their customers. In this slide, you'll see the alternative cases in the Y scheme. As we said, some of the companies may prefer PDPs, public invoicing portals, or some of the companies can prefer the registered private platforms. So whichever case is selected, the Y scheme provides a seamless integration between the parties. For instance, in this scheme, you can see the supplier 1 takes services from PDP1, private service operator, registered private platform PDP1, and buyer D gets services from the public invoicing portal. So how the invoice will be submitted from supplier 1 to buyer D? For this, first the invoice is submitted by supplier 1 to the PDP, and then PDP sends the invoice to the public invoicing portal, and then public invoicing portal transmits the invoice to the buyer B. So this is the chain. There are three alternative chains in this structure. So each of these chains can be used depending on the company's choices. If the public invoicing portal is used, the services will be given by the public invoicing portal. In the other case, registered private platforms will give the same service. As we discussed in one of the previous slides, we have a central directory of invoice recipients. This central directory stores all of the information regarding the invoice recipients, because during the transmission of invoices, the PDPs and the public platform needs to know which platform does the buyer take service. So this information is stored in the central directory, and this directory information should be updated by PDPs and the companies. This is under responsibility of PDPs. So once a new company takes service from a new PDP, then this information should be submitted to the central directory, and the information should be updated accordingly. Otherwise, the invoices may be sent to incorrect addresses. In the system, 4 main data types can be exchanged. The first one is the invoice data, the mandatory data for e-invoicing. We have 2 phases for this. In the first phase, in the phase 1, 24 mandatory data items. These are defined in the government directories. So we have 24 mandatory data items that should be shared in the mandatory invoicing. In phase 2, 8 additional data items will be added. So in total, 32 mandatory data items should be shared over the system. In addition to that, during the transition phase, companies have the option to submit invoices in unstructured PDF format. So in order to cope with inefficiencies and problems, the government has such a decision. So during the transition phase, the PDF invoices are also allowed to share it as the e-invoicing system. In addition to these 2 mandatory data, we have also status data. Status data corresponds to the current status of the invoice throughout the system, throughout its life cycle in the system. This status data should be shared between the parties when the status changes. For instance, when an invoice is submitted to the private platform, then the invoice status should be updated accordingly. When the invoice is accepted by the buyer, then the invoice status should be updated again. So this status data should be always up to date on the system. Finally, we have the e-reporting data. E-reporting data differs according to transaction type. For instance, if it's an international B2B transaction, the information in e-reporting data may change. If it's a B2C transaction, local transaction, then the information changes. So depending on the transaction type, the data contained in the e-reporting data may change. All of these data requirements are also well defined in the government directives. Here you can see the offerings by the public invoicing portal. In the public invoicing portal provides services in 3 distinct modes: the portal mode, the EDI mode, and the service mode. Portal mode corresponds to can be used by the small enterprises especially, because portal mode is a manual mode. The companies should visit the government portal, should log in the portal, should create and upload the invoice to this portal, and after creation should send the invoice to the corresponding invoice recipient, can track the invoice status over the portal. Additionally, the buyer should log in the portal in order to get and download the invoice receipt on the portal. So portal mode is a supplementary mode, and it is especially efficient for small companies that have small number of invoices. Then portal mode can be the preferred mode. In addition to portal mode, there are 2 main more efficient modes: the EDI mode and the service mode. EDI corresponds to exchanging of structured business data between the partners. So by using some protocols, the data is exchanged between different systems. So the public invoicing portal has these protocols, has these services. So using these EDI protocols, EDI services, the information can be sent to the portal by using EDI mode. However, remember that EDI mode is not a continuous mode. It is not in real time. So to use the EDI mode, for instance, you can schedule the EDI transmits per hour or at the end of day. So depending on this period defined, you can send the invoice data to the portal, public invoicing portal. API mode, the service mode, is similar to EDI mode. However, it is in real time or nearly real time. In service mode, the government portal provides some API services. So using these API services, the communication between different systems can be achieved in real time. So when you create an invoice, then you can send this invoice to the government portal, public portal in real time by using the corresponding API service. Additionally, you can get the status information about the invoice in real time again. For instance, if you send an invoice and it is rejected by your buyer, then you can see the status information by using the API services in real time. So it is the most efficient way, especially for large companies that process large number of invoices. This mode can be the preferred mode. So each mode has some advantages and disadvantages. So depending on the business requirements, the suitable mode can be selected. In the transmission of invoices, we have an invoice lifecycle starting from invoice creation and ends with the payment process. So during this life cycle, we have different statuses defined for the invoice. For instance, once an invoice is created and submitted to the platform, the portal, then the invoice status is updated as submitted. When it is issued by the platform, then its status is updated by issued by the platform. So depending on the action achieved by the corresponding stakeholders, the invoice status is updated. So for each stage, starting from preparation and emission, reception, validation, return, and payment stages, all of these stages are well defined, and so the invoice status should be updated by the corresponding party according to these statuses. These statuses, the definitions of this status information is also explained in a detailed manner in the government directives. Additionally, after the creation of invoice, there are certain controls performed by different parties at the e-invoicing and e-reporting system. Depending on the mode, the manual submission, the portal mode, or EDI mode, or API mode, the invoices pass through some controls. These are technical controls, application controls, functional controls, and business controls. In each of these controls, some certain aspect of the invoice is checked. So at the end of the process, an invoice is created that has no errors in terms of standardization, in terms of data content, etc. So during the life cycle, there are several controls that should be performed on the invoice. So in this slide, you can see some example controls. For instance, for technical controls, antivirus control, empty file control, file type and extension control, signature control and verification, data flow uniqueness control, and all of these controls are done. And if some problems are determined, then an error message is sent together with the corresponding result if the control fails. Again, the application controls, the functional controls, and business controls are conducted by the by the public invoicing portal or the registered private platforms, and corresponding as a result of these controls, the invoice status is updated accordingly. See you soon. Have a nice day. Thank you for joining.
Thanks, everyone.